Superman is one of the most iconic fictional characters of all time. I'd even say he's the most iconic superhero of all time. And when there's something really iconic, it's bound to get a bunch of films made about it. Films that are probably varying in quality. So today, I'm going through all 6 Superman films, and at the end, I'll decide which is the best and which is the worst. Should be fun, so let's start. So we're going to start off with the all-time classic, Superman the movie. Now, as I've learned from comment sections on my videos, there are some people who truly don't like this movie and think it's really overrated. And I'm sorry to all those people who are now going to be upset with this review, but I think it's a great movie. It isn't perfect, it's got some dumb moments for sure, but this was back in the 70s and it was essentially the first really big superhero movie. The film, first and foremost, is full of great casting. Christopher Reeve is the perfect choice for a 70s Superman. He's heroic, he can pull off that suit, he can act dorky as Clark Kent, he completely embodies the character. Sure, he wouldn't fit in Man of Steel or any of these modern superhero movies, but for this kind of movie, he totally works. Then there's Gene Hackman as Lex Luthor, and he isn't really a super accurate representation of the comic book Luthor, but he still does a good job and makes for a good villain. The rest of the cast is also pretty solid. The music in this is phenomenal, one of the best scores ever put to film. John Williams is the best at making music that fits with the movie's world, whether it be music for a 1930s adventure, a dinosaur theme park, or a superhero flying into space. The visual effects are amazing for the time, and even now, obviously you can tell that they're special effects, but they don't by any stretch look like garbage. The main thing I love about this movie, and I'll say this time and time again, is that it's so full of joy and awe and hope and all that. For lack of better words, it feels pure, and it feels like a lot of genuine hard work was put into it, and I love it for that. The movie is also dated and silly in a lot of parts. There are a lot of campy moments and all that, but I feel like that kind of helps. It's fun for a 1970s Superman movie to be a bit silly and cheesy. It's part of what makes it Superman. My only real complaint with this is the ending. Stupid moments are fine, but this just took it to a new level. What's the point of any conflict if Superman can just reverse time by flying around the Earth? That being said, it's not the worst thing ever, and it's definitely not the stupidest thing that happens in these Superman movies. Overall, this is a cinematic classic, and will live on in history as the movie that really started this superhero movie genre. It's full of fun and joy and is good for people of all ages, and I'm gonna give it a 9.2 out of 10. So after a pretty huge success with the first film, Superman 2 was put into production, and there was so much behind the scenes drama with this movie, from this director being fired to this director being fired, that ultimately this should have come out a total mess. But in the end, I actually liked it. It isn't flawless and it's not as good as the first film, but there are some good things going on here. For one, the villains are really good, better than the ones in the first film. Terrence Stamp is fantastic as General Zod, and his whole crew made for some fun bad guys. The fight between Zod and Superman, sure, it doesn't really hold up now, but it's good for the time. The special effects, again, are also pretty good for the 80s. There's a new subplot with Lois Lane figuring out that Clark Kent is Superman, and I actually kind of liked that. It was new and interesting, and it made sense for a character. And all in all, quite a bit of the stuff the first movie did well, this film also has. Good music, good casting, good tone, all that kind of stuff. It isn't as good, but it's still pretty fun. Now for what I didn't like. It has some more cheesy and stupid moments, but this time around, they don't really flow as much. There's another dumb, unexplained ending where Superman erases Lois Lane's memory by kissing her, because Superman can do anything, I guess. He also randomly throws a cellophane S out of his chest for no reason, though I have to admit that did make me laugh. I also don't think Lex Luthor necessarily needed to be in this. You've got Zod, so you could have just gone with that. The comic relief and humor in this also isn't fantastic, and this feels a bit less genuine than the first film. It's not as well constructed or as entertaining. All that said, Superman 2 isn't as classic as Superman 1, but it's still a solid movie. It's got an excellent villain in General Zod and some cool moments, which all adds up to an 8 out of 10. So now this is where these movies started to take a turn for the worse. Superman 3 is a really weird movie. There's a weird mix of trying to be a faithful Superman movie with trying to be a comedy, I think, and it just doesn't work. However, let's talk positives. Well, the music is again pretty awesome in this. There are also some cool special effects and interesting moments. The whole plotline of Clark Kent and Superman being split into separate people I liked. That was actually kind of cool. And the cast also hasn't completely given up yet. And that's pretty much all I like. Now let's get down to why this movie doesn't work. First up, there is no more of that wonder or awe or amazement from the first film. Even the second film had some of it, but all of that is gone by now. This is also, like I mentioned, supposed to be more comedic, and I'm sorry, but I just didn't find it funny. There wasn't a moment in this movie where I laughed. The action is also pretty boring by now. Some special effects aren't bad, but some really don't hold up, and there just isn't anything that interesting. The plot of this film is for the most part bad, and in a lot of parts it's rehashed from the other films. The new elements they add to it, like the romance with Lana Lang, really don't work. Again, except for that Superman Clark Kent split. But even with that, it's just really silly and corny, and at this point it doesn't add to the experience of the movie. In the end, this doesn't feel at all like it was made for creative integrity. This isn't the worst movie I've ever seen. There are some things about it that I kinda like, but I'm still gonna have to give it a 3.8 out of 10. So, here we are. This is pretty much as bad as a movie can get. It's not so bad it's good, or ironically good in some way. It's just really terrible. Like, pretty much everything a movie like this needs, this movie just doesn't have. The cast is back again, but they all kind of look like they're there for the paycheck. The plot is so unbelievably stupid, and the Superman movies are known for having stupid moments, but not to this extent. The writers were like, how do we get out of this situation? Who cares, he's Superman. He can just rebuild the Great Wall of China with his eyes, sure. And trust me, that is just one example. The villain in this is Nuclear Man, who isn't a good villain, as if it needed to be said. The action and special effects are really bad, bad, and as the people over at Screen Junkies pointed out, they actually reused green screen shots just in front of other backgrounds. This had a considerably lower budget and so looks really cheap compared to those other movies. Any and all amazement and fun in these movies is gone by now. This really feels like the opposite of that first film. It's not genuine, it's not exciting, it's not innovative, it's just awful. So in the end, I do have to say, I saw this movie quite a while ago, so if there was something really great in here that I missed, then that's why. However, this is still a cheap, slapped together mess, then I'm gonna have to give a 1 out of 10. Also, just for the record, I'm not including Supergirl in this video because I don't want to watch it. So after the commercial and financial bomb that was Superman 4, DC put off Superman for just under 20 years before giving the character a reboot. And by reboot, I mean kind of reboot, kind of vague continuation, I think. The thing is with this movie, it has kind of the same tone and style as the original movies, and if I'm not mistaken, Bryan Singer said that this was sort of a sequel to Superman 2, making this less of a reboot and more the third film in the franchise. It's all very confusing, but putting that aside, Superman Returns came out in 2006, and I have some mixed thoughts. For one, Bryan Singer, coming off of 2 very successful superhero films, jumped over to the Superman franchise, and he's a good director. His visual and directing style worked for Superman. The cast in this is really good. Brandon Routh is good as the lead, Kevin Spacey is a great choice for Luthor, and the rest of the actors play their characters well. The costume is also good. It feels like a slightly modernized version of the 70s suit. Not so modernized that it's unrecognizable, but it's altered just enough so it doesn't look goofy. Now I have to mention, there are 2 amazing moments or scenes in this movie. One is where Superman gets shot and the bullet bounces off his eye in slow motion. Fantastic. And then there's the whole plane catch scene, which may actually be my favorite Superman movie scene. It's really exciting, it looks spectacular, and it's very Superman. When I hear Superman, I usually think saving people or catching a plane falling out of the sky. Now I really have 2 major complaints with this film. One, I personally found it boring as hell. With the exception of those 2 scenes I just mentioned, it's really bland and forgettable. I'm totally fine with the movie not having a ton of action, but just something would have been good. The film starts off pretty solid, but then as it goes, it sort of loses direction and it goes on for too long. And I also didn't like the ending. It just didn't make sense to me. So ultimately, in 2006, by changing up his movies, Bryan Singer managed to indirectly give us a really bad X-Men movie and a pretty mediocre Superman movie. I get that a lot of people like this, totally fine. It's personally just not my cup of tea. Still though, not without its redeeming moments, and I'll give it a 6 out of 10. So now we've finally gotten to Man of Steel. Quite a few people didn't like Superman Returns, so DC decided to reboot Superman again and make him start off this entirely new DC cinematic universe. And everyone I hear from seems to hate Man of Steel. There are so many people who genuinely think it's terrible, and I don't really get that. This movie isn't perfect by any stretch, but it isn't that bad. Well, let's look at the positives and negatives. For one, once again, the cast is pretty great. I feel like that's something nearly all the Superman movies get right. Henry Cavill is a great choice to play Superman. Amy Adams is good as Lois. Both of Superman's dads are well cast, and Zod was pretty intense. I don't think he was a fantastic villain. All I really remember him doing was screaming and punching things, but he played the part well enough. The visual effects, for the most part, are really cool. This is really the first film where Superman actually has some intense fighting, and while that will lead into a negative later, I really like finally seeing Superman be able to fight in live action and have it look cool. This movie also showed a newer side to Superman, one that hadn't really been explored in film before, his more human side. There are some heartfelt moments, especially between Pa Kent and Clark, and on the whole, the film is entertaining. On the negative side, this movie feels like 2 separate films merged into one. The first half is kind of a more personal, interesting story. Clark Kent growing up, we get to see some of his life through flashbacks, and he finds the suit and everything's great. Almost all of the special effects look really good, and it feels more compelling. Then Zod comes to Earth, and at that point it turns into an overblown action movie. Explosion, building crash, heat vision, and there was just so much collateral damage and death and destruction, and it was just too much. Less would have been more, and it also goes on for way too long. I've seen people say, oh, why is it okay for the Avengers to smash down a city, but Superman can't? Well, there's one big difference. You see the Avengers actively trying to save people. In this, it almost feels like Superman is trying to knock down as many buildings as he can. The thing that I find weird is that Superman throws Zod into a building, and it does literally no damage to him. But then he just keeps throwing him into buildings. Just take him to an empty field or into space. You clearly have the power to do at least that. The plot is also a bit too complicated for its own good. Like, there's this whole thing with Krypton and the Codex and these Matrix babies, and it just really didn't need to be there. In the end, there are a lot of things this movie gets wrong, but there is still quite a bit of enjoyment to be had. If you want a more action-packed Superman movie, and you don't really care if it doesn't make a ton of sense or if it's well-paced, then you'll love this. I didn't love it, but I enjoyed it for what it was, and I'll give it a 7.8 out of 10. Now for the ruling. For the best, again, sorry if you don't like it, but I'm going for the original Superman. Man of Steel and Superman 2 were pretty close, but you just can't beat a classic. And for the worst, Superman 4. No contest. So those were my thoughts on the Superman films. Which is your favorite and least favorite? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. While you're at it, be sure to like this video, check out my Instagram at BHL_Hudson, and subscribe for more videos like the one you just watched. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.